Welcome back, team, on the journey to transform culture. I'm Steve, and I'll be your guide. Well, good afternoon. I hope everybody had a great weekend. Today, let's talk a little bit about objectification. Objectification, as the simplest way we understand it, is objectifying, right, someone um, to essentially be seen as a tool, a toy, or a means to an end. And how does that relate then to organizational culture, the culture at large, and even in personal relationships for that matter? Well, how it relates is if somebody's treating somebody like an object or a means to an end, then they're not treating them like a human being. They're not showing compassion, empathy, respect, love, right? In those cases, they're not demonstrating their humanity, essentially, treating others as they would like to be treated as well. They're essentially treating somebody like a tool, like a hammer, like a wrench, right? And it's really sad and disappointing. In culture, we see how the media and on the male side of the house culture, where women have been objectified, right? Which is absolutely disgusting. But we've also seen, too, and it's become more of a social norm to see how men have been objectified as well. And how so? Well, to be seen as a tool or a means to an end in the case of having a very good job, the ability to provide, right? A human being is more than what they can provide in resources. And that's essentially when you're doing that, you're objectifying. And it wouldn't matter if we're talking about men or women. I'm just using old traditional examples of those two cases. These days, even men are objectified as it relates to media and other things, right? So, and for the most part, society makes no apologies for it. But where it becomes dangerous in organizations is when it becomes systemic. That is, when leadership or ownership, for that matter, sees the employee pool as a means to an end, right? Sees them as a tool or a mechanism to achieve their goals rather than seeing them as people, with families, hearts, minds, relationships in their own lives, contributors to the greater culture, and that sort of thing. Now, I'm not saying that all organizations and all leaders and owners do that, but we do know it exists. And it also exists, conversely, from the employee pool, seeing companies, corporations, owners, and leaders as a means to an end as well. To just get the job isn't good enough, right? To be continually contributing, as we all should, no matter where we are in an organization or where we are in culture, is essential. But to see an employer as a means to an end versus as an entity, another, essentially legally, they're seen as a person, right? With all the same rights. And not to see them as contributors to the society at large and culture, right? By paying taxes, by creating jobs in the community, by being involved in the community when that's the case. We know that's not always the case, just like we know that, conversely, employees aren't always out in the community and supporting the community either. So the shoe fits on both sides if we're looking at it from those perspectives. We really should just be seeing it as one perspective. The whole idea of objectification is that it's easier to put people in these boxes of, well, the employee pool, oh, the leadership management pool. It's easier to create this us versus them scenario when I'm objectifying these groups to begin with, right? Whether it be individually or as a group. When I do that, then minimization kicks in. And anytime you're minimizing people, you're doing them a disservice, but you're also devaluing the people on your team. You're devaluing your peers. You're devaluing your management and the ownership even. So this minimization and devaluing really doesn't have any regard for where you are in the organization, if you're the newest employee or the CEO. It's just wrong all the way around. But we see this. And how do we see it? Because we can't say every organization, every leadership culture, culture that has the leadership ownership driving their end of it, as well as the team, we can't say all of them are falling prey to this all the time. It's kind of like having a stop sign or speed signs or road signs, right? We know people are getting pulled over because they're not paying attention to the traffic signs and that sort of thing. Well, how do we know this? We know because people get ticketed. We also know because there are accidents, right? But when we're talking about organizational culture, we know it happens. Why is that? Well, roughly a third of just about everything produced, GDP in the United States, goes to waste, is essentially waste. But it's divvied up into many different forms. That is extrapolated down into organizations. It's extrapolated right down into households. And it's part of the reason why we have such massive inflation, too. The waste that we create every day contributes directly to our inflation. It isn't the only contributor, but it is a massive one. So if you figure $25 trillion GDP, and you estimate about a 30% of that, right? That's almost $8 trillion being flushed down the tubes every year. Now, if you're wondering where the pay raises went, why your company's not growing, why we can't afford food and rents and housing have doubled, if you're wondering why all these things are occurring, it's because we've justified, right? This justification culture that we've talked about in the past, where well, we justify the creation of waste and not being efficient because it's just a part of doing business. Well, it's really not. It is the result of being inefficient and ineffective. It's the result of not cooperating. It's the result of not collaborating. And, it is the systemic result of this minimization, objectification, us versus them creation by groups, individuals and groups in organizations and in the culture at large. Now, you don't have to throw a rock very far to see where this applies with different faiths, the politics of the day, no matter what country we're talking about, what community we're talking about. Minimization, objectification is what is occurring. And when you do that, and you create walls, and these walls are really these are the things that are dividing everyone. So, what are we suggesting? Well, first of all, let's start treating people like humans with respect, right? Empathy, love, kindness. And then start working towards being more collaborative, open to innovative pursuits, getting on board with trying to solve problems together versus trying to divide one another. This starts this happens in every personal relationship, in homes, in communities, and it springs outward into organizations that people work for, small business to large corporations, and then goes into states. And depending on what country you're in, it expands outward into the country, right? It's systemic and it starts at the base level. It starts in essentially personal relationships, objectifying somebody and seeing them as a means to an end, right? Where else do you see it? Well, look at children as they're growing. We see them as they become older, start to see their parents as a means to an end. It's, can I have the car? I need some money because I want to do the thing. Pay for my college, do this, do that, do this. The parents essentially are becoming an ATM machine, right? A walking ATM machine. And if that mindset continues, and you can look around, probably not too far to see how it does, what happens? It doesn't mean because the parents do this that children are successful because they do that. There is no correlation between a parent doing that and then you're also becoming enablers. In this case, I'm using the parents as an example of an enabler, right? So this is why overgiving and not having equal reciprocal relationships, whether it be personal or in organizations, is damaging. It is damaging because somebody, in this case, people higher on the narcissist and sociopath tendency, side of the house, and those who are overgivers, you have the codependent and you have the enablers. And this is where it springs out. And where is the root of all this? The root is in the objectification, seeing other people as a means to an end. People who go out there and get into relationships because somebody has a lot of money or owns this or owns that, materialism, right? So we have to be really guarded. Obviously, much older, and I've seen this in the world as I've gone along over the many decades, and so probably have others. But for those starting out, you don't have to look far. Some you don't have to look beyond your extended family, your extended friend group to see where there are those people who are only there if they can get something from you, right? It doesn't matter if it's time, attention, money, whatever it is. In fact, you may have family members the same way. Well, guess what? There are people, in the organizational culture side of the house that act the same way. Owners might also be the same way, objectifying employees, right, to essentially toy with them. They're treating them like a tool, but also a toy if they're narcissists, because that's kind of sadly how they get their dopamine hit, is by treating people poorly and kind of torturing them, right? Pretty much you can't live life and not have heard somebody talk about an employer who was absolutely toxic toward their employees, which is absolutely disturbing when you hear about it. But these are examples, blatant examples, where objectification is going on. So how do we curb this? Well, first of all, we have to recognize objectification is happening. Then we have to call it out. We have to call it out when we see it, or we have to at least acknowledge it in the normal lexicon of our operating, how we live and how we operate in organizations. Because if we don't make it part of the conversation, it won't go away. It'll sneak back in, and it won't matter who it sneaks back in through, the newest employee all the way up to the CEO. If we start to see people, we start to treat them as objects, a means to an end, treating them like a tool, tormenting them like your own personal toy. Think of a cat hitting the ball around. This is not how we treat other human beings. This is not how we treat other people with respect and dignity. And it's definitely not how we protect love. Remember, that's another way that we can assure ourselves that we're not objectifying anyone for any reason, is to protect love. Am I protecting love in what I'm saying, what I'm doing, and how I'm acting as a leader, as an owner, as a team member, even as a customer? Because we know, customers are human beings too. If your organization is a customer to other organizations, you can also do a little self-examination to see how you come across when you're talking to your suppliers and then sister or brother facilities. How are you treating one another? So this is something that the organizational landscape needs to address. They need to, human resources and others need to make it part of the conversation. Make it a part of the conversation so we understand that objectification and allowing it to run rampant will just snowball the effects of toxicity in organizations, toxicity in any relationship, really. It doesn't matter if it's personal, family, friends, but the culture at large. And organizations are just a very systematized part of our culture that we can look at, and we can pull the data out to see how the results of this are occurring. So examine your organization, when you're doing some surveys, and find out, hey, do the employees feel objectified, right? And if they are, address it. Why do they? Because it's also possible that people feel objectified because they came from other organizations that objectified them. Coming into your organization, you may have never objectified them, but they have taken on that mantle. They have essentially taken on that role because they think all employers objectify them or treat them badly, right? Create toxic cultures. And you don't want that. So you need to make sure that you're communicating up front and regularly about how you communicate, how you treat one another. That way you can innovate, collaborate, and produce to the best of your ability. I want to appreciate you for stopping by today. Hit like, share, and subscribe. Remember to hit the good domino 3 to 5 times a day to uplift, inspire, motivate, and just help overall people to make their transformation going through very difficult times, especially in organizations and in culture where you see this toxicity. All right, take care. We'll talk to you guys later. Have a good day.